Hey everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. Today we're going to be talking about anti-heroes. The anti-hero is one of my favorite character tropes and one that's becoming ever more popular in the past decade or so. Basically, they're a subversion of who we expect a hero to be. They may be lacking in heroic traits, do noble things but maybe not always for the right reasons, or be ultimately fueled by selfish desire. On Friday we're going to be talking about anti-villains, which is kind of the parallel trope to the anti-hero, and they're often conflated as one, but there is a distinction. Anti-heroes are protagonists or usually aligned with the protagonist, whereas anti-villains on the other hand are the antagonist or aligned with the antagonistic forces of a story, and are tending to do the wrong things but for maybe perceived noble or sympathetic reasons within their own mind. For another distinction, how is an anti-hero different from a villain as protagonist? There are a handful of books that follow villains as the main character or as the narrator, but these characters truly are villains and tend to lack reason for the reader to invest in them. We're following these characters because they're very interesting and we want to see what they do next, not because we necessarily sympathize with their actions like we probably would with an anti-hero. We don't necessarily become morally invested in a villain as protagonist, but we would in an anti-hero. All distinctions aside, there are different types of anti-hero. The trope doesn't always look the same and has 5 different categories within it. So let's take a look at these different types of anti-hero on scale from most morally righteous to most morally gray or most morally compromised. Type number 1 is the classic anti-hero. So if the classic traits of a hero are confidence, bravery, intelligence, stoicism, good looks, and strong fighting capabilities, the classic anti-hero basically just takes all of these traits and reverses them, giving us a character who's pretty ill-equipped to take on their duties as a hero. This character is anxious and self-doubting and lacking in most of the regular capabilities that comes along with being a hero. They may have never swung a sword in their life and never gone on any kind of adventure before. For the classic anti-hero, their arc typically follows them overcoming their fears and what they perceive as weaknesses, and often showing how their perceived weaknesses can actually be their strengths. They're not necessarily morally gray. In fact, these characters are often fairly morally righteous. They just aren't characters that we would typically pick out of a lineup as being the hero. A great classic example is Bilbo Baggins. He's not a bad person, he's just an adventure-hating homebody who likes the safety and comfort of what he knows. He doesn't have any of the classic traits of being a hero, but he still ends up in that role within the story. One step down on our scale of morality is the knight in sour armor. Now on a scale of morality, this character is still pretty good. They know right from wrong, but they tend to be very cynical and don't think that they can actually make a difference. They tend to lack urgency or motivation to join the fight because they don't think there's really a point to it. They're more about doing their own thing, and although they might not have bad morals, they tend to be in it for themselves and are more about kind of just doing their own thing. Eventually, of course, this character does tend to join the fight because they do need to be drawn into the plot somehow, but it usually happens because they end up having some sort of personal stake in it. A great example is Han Solo from Star Wars. He starts as a mercenary who's just motivated by personal gain, and only agrees to help free Princess Leia because he's offered a monetary reward. Let's take yet another step down the path of gray morality and talk about the pragmatic anti-hero. This character is kind of like a darker version of the knight in sour armor. Similarly, this character tends to be self-centered and reluctant to accept a hero role. But the difference is that they're actually more likely to spring into action. They aren't usually as profoundly apathetic, but they're also more willing to do bad things if they deem them necessary and get their hands a little dirty. For example, Edmund from the Chronicles of Narnia. He's extremely just and pragmatic, but in the same way, quite unsympathetic to others and unwilling to show mercy. Unlike a traditional hero, he also has that need to prove himself. Treading yet again into more and more morally gray waters, we encounter the unscrupulous anti-hero. Now this character's motives and intentions are still good, but we're in very murky territory in terms of their actual actions. This character probably doesn't have much of a problem with, well, just about anything if they deem necessary. They may have a desire to do good, but they tend to be very cynical and misguided either by past traumas or by a desire for revenge. So in taking down the villain, they can take things a little bit too far. Conan the Barbarian is a great example of this type of character, a similar archetype to a lot of unscrupulous anti-heroes that you see. He's a character who has basically no qualms about violence or theft or even killing, and sometimes even partakes in these things as part of a quest for power, not even just for his own survival. But he still ends up leading a couple heroic feats by the end. Now we've reached the far side of the scale, the most morally gray anti-hero that we can get, and this is the hero in name only. This character is really lacking in morals and values. They can be completely immoral, sinister, or in some cases redeemable simply because they're not as bad as the villain of the story. However, oftentimes the case is that this character could easily be the villain if the story wasn't from their point of view. A great example of this is Walter White. Throughout, he claims that his criminal activity is to provide for his family. And although that might seem true at the very beginning, it quickly becomes clear that he has a more self-serving motive, and that really his moral boundaries are completely breaking down as he's faced with his own mortality. By the end of the series, he's really turned into a full-blown villain. But you wouldn't really consider him a villain. He's still more of an anti-hero because at the start of the series, he starts off as kind of just an awkward, geeky, unassuming teacher and father who seems like the last person you'd expect to become a criminal mastermind and head of a drug empire. You might start out sympathizing with him, but then end up watching him go completely morally bankrupt. So to summarize, an anti-hero is a character in a hero role who subverts our expectations of what a hero normally is, whether by complicated or skewed morality, or just by lacking the normal skills that we'd expect a hero to have. This can range from the classic anti-hero who is generally a good person but just lacks in kind of the heroic qualities of a traditional hero, to the hero in name only who's often kind of completely morally bankrupt and could easily be the villain if the story were told differently. For more examples of different anti-heroes such as Sherlock Holmes, and yes, even Michael Scott from The Office, you can check out the blog post linked in the description. Who is your favorite anti-hero? And have you ever written an anti-hero? If so, which type of anti-hero? At the moment, I am writing a novel with an anti-hero protagonist, and I think that she would fall under the unscrupulous anti-hero category. I'm pretty sure is where I'd place her. She doesn't have a lot of morals, but I don't think she's quite in almost villain territory. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We have new writing, editing, and publishing videos every Tuesday and Friday, and this Friday we will be talking about anti-villains. Thanks for watching. Bye.